Well, special kind of breaking news. We were going to call it quits for the evening. Um, we were very pleased about the CNN documentary coming out on Cal Exit, falling in line with the Warner Brothers Music podcast documentary on Cal Exit. And I was telling my friends, hey, we've got these great documentaries on Cal Exit. And one of my friends hit me back with this. Just about to tell her, hey, you got to check out this great documentary on CNN about Cal Exit. And she texted me back, I was actually going to hit you up. It's in the air. There's a Lex interview with a woman that you should check out. So I was telling her about the CNN documentary about Cal Exit. And she goes, you actually need to see this other thing I just found where this person is talking about secession could possibly happen. So we have found that video, and it is 3 days ago. Came out 3 days ago. So that's why my friend is saying it's in the air. It's in the air. Hey, there's this Warner Brothers Cal Exit documentary. Hey, there's the CNN documentary. Did you follow? Did you watch those? No, I was busy watching another interview where they also talked about secession being possible. And she's not a fan of secession. I have a lot of friends who aren't fans of secession, but they tell me things they see. And I was just going to brag, and then she comes back with, oh, my God, you got to see this. This just came out. So Lex Fridman does interviews on podcasts, also available in video. He recently interviewed Fiona Hill. Fiona Hill is a former official at the U.S. National Security Council specializing in Russian and European affairs. It's going to be very key. Fiona Hill was an intelligence analyst under both Presidents Bush W. and Barack Obama. She was also appointed by Donald Trump as a deputy assistant to the president for European and direct Russian affairs. So she has been an advisor to 3 separate presidents, and she is an expert in Russian affairs. You may have heard her because she was a key witness in the 2019 impeachment of Donald Trump. So she is a liberal. She's not a red state person. She's not a Trump fan, obviously. She was very respected, advised multiple presidents on international affairs, and she is an expert on Russia. Why is that relevant? Well, because she just said in the interview that she was in the USSR as it was breaking up in the 90s, and that her colleagues feel that the environment in the USSR right before it broke apart is just like America today. She and her colleagues feel, who are also experts in the USSR, that the environment of the USSR as it was right before it broke up is just like America today. That's what she's saying. And she is an expert in the field. So you can go, oh, who is she? Why do we need to listen to her? Because she's one of the most foremost experts on Russia and advises multiple presidents. And so she would be somebody who would be an expert on the USSR and its history and know what it was like. And she was also in the USSR at that time. And she's an academic and keeps studying Russian issues and knows other Russian scholars. And she's saying the environment in Russia right before the Soviet Union collapsed is just like America today. And I got this interview because I was going to go brag about the CNN documentary on CNN, and I was told, did you see this other thing that just came out where they're also talking about secession is likely in America? Let me show you. I was telling her about this new documentary by CNN, which comes out roughly at the same time as this new documentary by Warner Brothers Music, all on Cal Exit. Here's where we got the information about Fiona Hill, former presidential advisor and expert. And this is the interview she gave. This is on the Lex Fridman podcast. This came out 3 days ago. 3 days ago. That's why my friend said it's in the air. Let's take a look at what she has to see. And I want you to pay attention to what Lex Fridman says and how she shuts that down hard. She shuts Lex Fridman down hard What was she arguing with him about? Well, Lex was like, no, it's not going to happen in America. We're totally different than the USSR. And she shuts that down hard. No, you're not. It's just like the way it was in the USSR right before they split apart. And she says it wasn't collapse, it was secession in the USSR. And she's one of the world's foremost experts on the subject. And she's comparing the climate in America today to the way Russia was in the USSR on the Lex Fridman podcast only 3 days ago, right as the documentaries about Calexit are coming on. So why is she talking about secession at the same time all these documentaries about Calexit are coming on? I don't know. Let's take a listen.
This is the period of, what they call deficitное время, the period of deficits. Well, there's no food in the shops. There was, very little in terms of commodities because the supply and demand parts of the economic equation were out of whack because this was total central planning. You could go into, a shop that was supposed to sell boots and there'd be just one pair of boots, all in the same size and the same color. I actually looked out because once I was in this Hungarian boot shop that was right next to where my hall of residence was, and I was looking for a new pair of boots, and every single pair of boots in the shop were my size.
She was talking about how the Soviet Union wasn't that great because they didn't have products.
And that size production. But you could really kind of see here that there was something wrong. And in the north of England, everything was closed down. The shops were shuttered because there was no demand, because everybody lost their jobs. There was massive employment. When I went off to university.
Let me do this. Sorry. Here we go.
In the periphery and among the general population that in fact pulled it apart. And of course, in 1991, you get Boris Yeltsin as the head of the Russian Federation, then a constituent part of the Soviet Union, together with the presidents of Ukraine and Belarus, all of these being individual parts of the Soviet Union, getting together and agreeing, essentially ending it. And
So what she just said was that the Soviet Union didn't fall apart. It didn't explode. It seceded. They said, okay, we're going to have no power back to constituent parts, but we're still the USSR. And then those constituent parts came together and agreed to allow each other to secede. So it was a joint agreed secession movement, is what she's just said. Again, an expert.
Gorbachev, so basically I'm there at the peak of this whole kind of period of experimentation and thinking about the future. And within a couple of years, it's all kind of gone and it's on a different track entirely.
Well, I wonder if we reran the 20th century 1,000 times, how many times the Soviet Union would collapse.
Yeah, I wonder about that too. And I also wonder about what would have happened if it didn't collapse and Gorbachev had found a different direction.
I mean, we see a very divisive time now in American history.
Here it is.
The United States of America. There's very different cultures, very different beliefs, ideologies within those states. But that's kind of the strength of America. There's these little laboratories of ideas.
Until, though, that they don't keep together. I mean, I've had colleagues who have...
You see that? Lex is like, no, America has differences, but that's the beauty of America, these differences, and that's what makes America together. And she immediately shut that down and go, except when it doesn't work. Watch, there's going to be a lot of interplay.
Describe what's happening in the US right now as a kind of soft secession, with states, going off in their own direction.
In which states?
Well, these kinds of conceptions that we have now, divisions between red and blue states because of the fracturing of our politics. And I'd always thought that wouldn't be possible in somewhere like the United States or many other countries as well, because there wasn't that ethnic dimension. But in fact, the way that people talk about politics has given it that kind of appearance in many respects. Because look, I mean, we know from the Soviet Union and the Soviet period, and from where you're from, originally in Ukraine, that language is not the main signifier of identity, and that identity can take all kinds of other forms.
That's really interesting. I mean, but there has to be a deep grievance of some kind. If you took a poll in it.
So she just said language, ethnic identity, these things that we would see as the reasons for why people would secede from each other isn't always the reason why people secede from each other. You can have an identity based upon things other than ethnic and historical language. And she was pointing that out, that she's seeing those signs in the USSR here in America, because the divisions aren't just based upon ethnic and language things. They're based upon other stuff, and that's possible. And then Lex comes back with, well, I don't know.
Many of the states in the United States, I think a very small minority of people would want to actually secede, even in Texas, where
that is a flat out lie. Sorry, Lex, I like you, but only a small minority, a tiny minority in any state would actually want to secede. It's 40% in Texas, and it's 32% in California. That is not a tiny minority in the two largest states. So he is dead wrong on this. Sad to see. That's based upon polling. That's not my opinion. Lots of polling. 40% Texas, 32% California. That is not a tiny minority, as he frames it. Could not be more wrong on that fact.
I spend a lot of my time.
Yeah.
I think that there is a common kind of pride of nation. There's a lot of people complain about government and about how the country's going. The way people complain about the weather when it's raining, they say, "Oh, this stupid weather, it's raining again."
Yeah.
But really, what they mean is, we're in the muck together. There's a together that
could not be more wrong. Californians have a difficulty being around the American flag. We've showed you that a lot. So there is no secret coming together with America. They're kind of disgusted with the American flag. We've literally showed you videos of that. So that's another hard, not wrong here in not correct here in California. And he's going to try to paint it as, people may argue, but they all have this pride as Americans.
I also feel that when I go around, because I've spent a lot of time since I wrote my book in last October, and this last year going around, I find the same feeling. But when I traveled around the Soviet Union back in the late 1980s, I didn't get any kind of sense that people wanted to see the end of the Soviet Union either. It was an elite project. There's a really good book called Collapse by Vladislav Zubok, who is a professor at London School of Economics at LSE. And Zubok is pretty much my age, and he's from the former Soviet Union, he's Russian. And he describes it very quite aptly about how it was kind of the elites, that basically decided to pull the Soviet Union apart. And there was a risk of that, here as well, when you get partisan politics and people forgetting, they're Americans and they're all in this together, like a lot of the population thing. But they think that their own, narrow partisan or ideological precepts, count for more. And in the Soviet case, of course, it was also a power play, in a way that actually can't quite play out in the United States, because it was the equivalent of governors in many respects who got together, three of them, in the case of the heads of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, who then, got rid of, basically the central figure of Mikhail Gorbachev. It would be a little difficult.
So he was saying, hey, we'll all be together. There's a common identity. And, that's why America will never break up. And she goes, yeah, that's exactly how they felt in the USSR. Like, nobody thought the USSR was going to break up when they did it. So they thought that the idea of the USSR breaking up was also crazy in the USSR. And if you asked them at that time, they'd have all sorts of experts saying, we've been together for 70 years. That's ridiculous. We're not going to secede or break apart. And they were all wrong, and it happened within 2 years. So she's saying, Lex is going, well, there's this common unity with Americans. And she's going, yeah, and there was in the USSR too. And nobody thought in the USSR they were going to fall apart too. But they did, because they started getting these partisan differences, which became very entrenched, just like in the USSR, where people couldn't agree to stay together and they couldn't agree on the path to fix problems. So they agreed to secede. That is something that can happen here. So Fiona Hill is saying, well, you had 3 governors who allowed it to do this and they agreed. Well, you have 400 people, right, in the Congress. What if they all agreed too? That would be the same concept. People in charge of separate parts all agree. We'll just amicably have a peaceful divorce. So that was an agreement for a peaceful divorce amongst the governors, which became leaders of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, to have a joint agreed secession movement. And the conditions in the USSR were the system was not working. People had no faith in their government, and they also didn't trust each other. And those conditions also all exist here in America today, according to one of the foremost experts on the USSR. You should think about that. And you should think about, why are they talking about this now when all these documentaries about Calexit are coming out? Why are all these documentaries coming out about Calexit now, right around midterms, when people think Republicans are going to win, including the media? And then why is this expert on Russian relations going on another liberal podcast and also talking about how America's ripe for secession, just like the USSR? Why is all this happening now? Unless it's in the air, as my friend who's not part of the Calexit movement said. Why are people who are not part of the movement noticing a discussion about secession all the time, all of a sudden? Weird. Or maybe it means something. We'll see you soon. Thanks again.